Imagine for a moment, a time when the vast and diverse continent of Africa, with its thousands of unique cultures, powerful kingdoms, and ancient traditions, was largely its own master. For centuries, African societies had developed really complex systems of governance, trade, and art. Maligana Songhai had flourished, creating incredible wealth and centers of learning that were, honestly, renowned across the known world. This was a continent of immense human achievement and potential. But as the 19th century drew to a close, a dark shadow began to stretch across this vibrant landscape. European powers, fueled by new technologies and a burning desire for resources and prestige, turned their eyes toward Africa with an unprecedented hunger, seeing it not as a continent of peoples but as a prize to be claimed. The scramble for Africa was exactly what it sounds like, a mad, chaotic dash. Between 1884 and 1914, European powers went from controlling small coastal areas to ruling over almost the entire continent. This wasn't a slow expansion, it was a sudden, aggressive invasion driven by intense rivalry. The Maxim gun, an early machine gun. It could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. African armies fought with spears, swords, older firearms, and were outmatched. Quinine protected Europeans against malaria. They could survive the interior, once called the white man's grave. Henry Morton Stanley charted the Congo River. Cecil Rhodes dreamed of Cape to Cairo. They signed treaties with African chiefs. Those treaties were deceptive. Rulers thought they signed friendship or trade. They unknowingly signed away sovereignty and resources. Ashanti Empire, Zulu Kingdom. Africans fought bravely. By the dawn of the 20th century, Africa's fate was no longer its own. To prevent the chaotic scramble for Africa from boiling over into a full-blown war between European powers, a meeting was called. In the winter of 1884, representatives from 13 European nations, the United States gathered in Germany for what became known as the Berlin Conference. Hosted by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, the purpose was not to consider the future of Africa or its people, but to lay down ground rules for the colonial takeover. It was a gentleman's agreement among thieves meant to make dividing the continent more orderly. No African leaders were invited. Their continent was partitioned without their presence or consent. Borders were completely artificial. Straight lines were drawn with rulers on a map in a distant European capital, cutting through kingdoms, ethnic groups, trading networks. People sharing a common language, culture, history found themselves in different colonies ruled by different European powers. So, the division of Africa was not an equal affair. A few key European powers emerged as the dominant colonial masters of the continent. The two biggest players were Britain and France. The British Empire, with its vast global reach, a chain of colonies stretched from Egypt to South Africa. They used a system called indirect rule, using existing local chiefs and traditional structures. France controlled a massive expanse, mainly West Africa and North Africa. They pursued assimilation, aiming to make colonial subjects French citizens. That meant imposing French language, French culture, French laws, and suppressing local traditions. In practice, few Africans got full French citizenship. King Leopold II of Belgium, the Congo Free State, became infamous for brutality. Portugal held Angola, Mozambique. Germany acquired territories in modern Tanzania, Namibia, and Cameroon. Economically, Africa's raw materials, rubber diamonds, gold, copper, agricultural products, needed to fuel European industry. The arrival of European rule was a cataclysmic event that permanently altered African societies. The most immediate and devastating impact was the loss of autonomy. For thousands of years, African peoples had governed themselves large, centralized empires, small, consensus-based communities. African rulers were deposed, exiled, subsistence farming, communities growing food to feed themselves was replaced by cash crop agriculture. Farmers were forced or taxed to grow cotton, coffee, cocoa often on land taken from them. Extraction of minerals increased. Gold, diamonds, copper. Culturally, the impact was profound. Colonizers imposed languages, religions, education systems, but often suppressed indigenous beliefs. Colonial schools taught European history and values, African history ignored or disparaged. The edifice of European colonialism, which seemed so permanent at the beginning of the 20th century, began to crumble in the aftermath of World War II. It also exposed a deep hypocrisy. Britain had fought for freedom and self-determination in Europe, and France had fought for freedom and self-determination in Europe. Yet they denied those same rights to millions of people living under their rule in Africa and in Asia. African soldiers who had fought alongside Europeans in the war returned home with a new perspective and a greater determination to win their own freedom. starting with Ghana's independence from Britain in 1957 under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah. The 1960s became the Year of Africa. 17 nations gained independence that year alone. The process was sometimes peaceful, achieved through negotiation and political pressure. In other cases it was violent and bloody. France and Algeria, Portugal and Angola, Portugal and Mozambique. However, two nations stand out as important exceptions: Ethiopia and Liberia. Ethiopia, an ancient empire, successfully resisted European conquest. Liberia was founded in the 1820s as a settlement for freed African American slaves supported by the United States and declared its independence in 1847. Even after the flags of European powers were lowered and new national anthems were sung, the legacy of colonization endured. The artificial borders drawn in Berlin remained, but the struggle to overcome the deep economic effects of the colonial era was just beginning. The story of modern Africa is the story of this ongoing struggle to build a future on foundations laid not by Africans, but for them. If this resonated, please stay tuned for more. Leave a comment below and hit the like button and follow us and share the video to spread the message. Subscribe to our channel, thank you. #Scramble for Africa #Berlin Conference #Decolonization #African History.